Commander had seen war across the galaxy. For 20 years, they had watched different alien races fight each other. The people were known as the best military planners in the galaxy. They could look at any battle and know who would win. They understood war better than anyone else. Worked for the Galactic Council. Their job was to watch battles and write reports. They had seen the Proud fight with their crystal weapons. They had watched the Empire use their massive ships to destroy planets. They had observed the insect-like swarm across star systems. Every race had their own way of fighting, but all of them followed the same basic rules. Rule 1, save your people. Rule 2, save your resources. Rule 3, fight only when you can win. These rules made sense. War was about achieving goals with the least cost. Smart commanders knew when to retreat. Smart races knew when to surrender. That was why I felt confused when the emergency signal came from New Meridian. It was a human colony on the edge of known space. The message was simple and terrifying. Swarm approaching. Estimated arrival in 6 hours. Send help. They were death itself. They traveled in living ships that ate everything in their path. They turned entire worlds into empty rocks. 12 different alien races had already run away when they came near their space. The smart thing to do was evacuate and hope the monsters would move on to easier targets. Ship arrived at New Meridian 4 hours after receiving the signal. Their sensors showed a planet with 50,000 human civilians still on the surface. The fleet was only 2 hours away. Any reasonable species would have started evacuating 3 days ago. "This makes no sense," said to their assistant lieutenant. "Where are the evacuation ships? Where are the refugee camps?" Check the sensors again. "Commander, I see some small ships moving around the planet, but nothing big enough for a major evacuation. Maybe the humans don't understand how dangerous they are." Had studied human military records. The humans were new to galactic civilization, only 50 years since first contact. They had fought a few small battles against pirates and raiders. Their weapons were simple but effective. Their tactics were basic but solid. Nothing in their history suggested they were stupid or suicidal. "Open a channel to the Planetary Defense Coordinator," ordered. The screen showed a human woman in a military uniform. She had short brown hair and calm eyes. According to the file, this was Colonel Sarah, the ranking military officer on New Meridian. "Observer," Colonel said before could speak. "Thank you for coming. We appreciate the Galactic Council's concern." "Colonel, my sensors show 50,000 civilians still on your planet. They will arrive in less than 2 hours. You need to begin immediate evacuation." Colonel smiled. It was not the expression of someone facing death. "We won't be evacuating, Observer, but thank you for the offer." Felt their tentacles curl in confusion. "Colonel, I don't think you understand. They have destroyed 12 worlds in the past 6 months. They don't take prisoners. They don't negotiate. They consume everything." "We understand perfectly," Colonel replied. "We've studied their attack patterns. We know what they do to populated worlds. That's exactly why we're staying." "That makes no logical sense," said. "Staying means certain death for everyone on your planet." "Does it?" Colonel asked. Her smile grew wider. "Observer, you're welcome to monitor the situation from a safe distance. We'll maintain an open channel if you want to watch." The transmission ended. Stared at the blank screen for several minutes. In 20 years of military observation, they had never encountered a species that chose extinction over retreat. Every rational being valued survival above all else. "Commander," Lieutenant said quietly, "should we report this to the Council? The humans appear to be suffering from some kind of mass psychological breakdown." Considered this. Mass hysteria could explain the humans' behavior. Perhaps their inexperience with galactic warfare had caused panic that manifested as denial. It was the only logical explanation. "Begin recording all sensor data," ordered. "Position us 15,000 kilometers from the planet. If we're going to witness the extinction of a species, the Council will want a complete record. The next hour passed in eerie silence. Watched their sensors, expecting to see evacuation ships fleeing the planet at the last moment. Instead, they saw the opposite. Small human vessels were actually moving toward the planet's surface. Ships that should have been carrying people away were bringing them back. "This is madness," whispered. "They're bringing more people to die." Said nothing. They were beginning to suspect that the humans knew something about that wasn't in any galactic database. Perhaps they had discovered a weakness. Perhaps they had developed some new weapon. It was the only explanation that made sense. At exactly 6 hours after the original warning, they arrived. The alien fleet dropped out of hyperspace like a disease spreading across the stars. Counted over 3,000 bioships, each one a living creature the size of a city. The smaller vessels looked like flying jellyfish with tentacles that could tear apart starships. The larger ones resembled massive worms with mouths that could swallow moons. "Signal the human colony," ordered. "Tell them it's not too late to evacuate." "No response, Commander," reported. "But I'm detecting something strange. The human ships on the planet's surface have gone completely dark. No energy signatures, no communications, nothing." Felt a chill run down their spine. Perhaps the humans had already died. Perhaps some advance force had reached the planet ahead of the main fleet. That would explain the silence. But then why were the ships still approaching? If the planet was already dead, they should have moved on to the next target. Instead, the bioships were forming attack formations, preparing for a full-scale assault on a supposedly empty world. "Commander," said, their voice shaking, "I think we're about to witness something unprecedented." Nodded grimly. They had come to observe the destruction of New Meridian. Instead, they might be about to witness the birth of something entirely new in galactic warfare, something that scared them more than the approaching fleet. The humans weren't running. They weren't surrendering. They weren't even fighting in any way that recognized. They were simply waiting. And that terrified more than any weapon they had ever seen. The fleet moved toward New Meridian like a slow-moving storm of death. Had seen them attack before, always following the same pattern. First, they sent scout ships to test the planet's defenses. Then the main fleet would position itself in orbit and begin the consumption process. "Beginning recording sequence," Lieutenant announced. All sensors focused on the planet's surface. Watched their screens carefully. They expected to see the last desperate moments of human civilization. Perhaps a few scattered defense platforms trying to fight the inevitable. Maybe some final transmissions from people saying goodbye to loved ones. Instead, they saw nothing. The planet looked completely dead. No energy signatures, no movement, no signs of life anywhere. Even the cities had gone dark. It was as if 50,000 people had simply vanished. "Could they have evacuated through underground tunnels?" suggested. "Maybe they have hidden ships on the far side of the planet." "Negative," replied, checking the long-range sensors. "I'm scanning the entire system. There are no human ships anywhere except ours." The first scouts reached the planet's atmosphere. These were small bioships, about the size of fighter craft, but they moved like living creatures. They had tentacles instead of wings and mouths that opened to reveal rows of sharp teeth. They could bite through metal hull plating and inject acid that dissolved entire ships from the inside. The scouts circled the planet twice, looking for threats. They found none. According to every sensor reading, New Meridian was an empty rock floating in space. "This doesn't make sense," muttered. "Where did they go?" The main fleet moved closer. These ships were much larger, some of them the size of entire cities. They looked like massive sea creatures that had learned to swim through space instead of water. Their hulls pulsed with organic rhythms, and they trailed clouds of smaller organisms behind them like living exhaust. The fleet commander, a creature couldn't even see properly through the bioship's translucent flesh, apparently decided that the planet was safe to approach. They began their standard consumption pattern. Large ships positioned themselves around the planet while smaller vessels descended to the surface. "They're beginning atmospheric seeding," reported. "I'm detecting the release of digestive organisms into the planet's air, standard procedure for breaking down organic matter." Nodded. They had seen this before. They would poison the atmosphere, kill any remaining life, and then use larger organisms to break down the planet's surface. Within a few days, New Meridian would be stripped bare, its resources absorbed into the living ships. But then something happened that had never seen before. The planet exploded. Not the whole planet, but every major city at the same time. Massive explosions erupted from the surface, creating pillars of fire that reached up into the atmosphere. But these weren't random explosions. They were precisely placed, creating patterns across the planet's surface. "What just happened?" shouted over the alarm signals from their sensors. Studied the explosion patterns. Each blast had been perfectly timed and positioned. The explosions weren't trying to destroy the ships in orbit. Instead, they were reshaping the planet's surface, creating narrow valleys and artificial canyons. "It's a trap," whispered. "The humans turned their own cities into bait." The organisms that had been released into the atmosphere were being funneled by the explosion patterns. Instead of spreading randomly across the planet, they were being guided into specific areas. The humans had used their own buildings as weapons, creating a massive maze that forced the alien creatures to move exactly where the humans wanted them to go. "But Commander," said, "those explosions would have killed any humans in those cities. They just destroyed their own people to create a trap." Was beginning to understand something terrible. "No, Lieutenant, I don't think there were any humans in those cities. I think they evacuated everyone beforehand and then waited for the perfect moment to spring their trap." As if to prove's point, new signals began appearing on their sensors. Automated defense systems were emerging from the wreckage of the cities. But these weren't military weapons. They were construction equipment, mining machines, and farming tools that had been modified for war. A massive mining drill burst from the ground directly underneath a group of organisms. But instead of drilling for ore, it was drilling through alien flesh. Industrial lasers, designed for cutting metal, began firing at the creatures from hidden positions. Agricultural processing equipment emerged from underground chambers, but instead of processing crops, they were processing organisms. "Dear gods," breathed, "they weaponized their entire civilization." The creatures found themselves trapped in the artificial canyons, unable to spread out or retreat. The modified human equipment was perfectly designed to handle large, organic targets. Mining explosives detonated in precise sequences, herding the aliens into kill zones. Construction mechs, built to move heavy materials, were now using their strength to tear apart bioships that got too close to the surface. But the most terrifying thing was the planning involved. This wasn't a desperate last-minute defense. The humans had obviously been preparing for this attack for months, maybe years. They had studied tactics, identified weaknesses, and designed their entire planetary infrastructure to counter them. "Signal from the planet's surface," reported. Colonel's face appeared on the screen again. She was no longer in a clean military uniform. Now she wore battle armor covered in alien blood. Behind her could see humans moving through the wreckage, but they weren't running in panic. They were working with calm efficiency, like technicians performing routine maintenance. "Observer," Colonel said. Her voice was still calm, but there was something new in her eyes, something that made skin crawl. "Phase 1 is complete. We've eliminated approximately 60% of their ground forces. Beginning Phase 2 now." "Phase 2, asked. "Colonel, what exactly have you done?" "We've been preparing for this attack since the day we established this colony," replied. "We knew that would come eventually, so we designed everything on this planet to be a weapon, Every building, every piece of equipment, every system. We didn't build a colony observer. We built a trap. The transmission cut out but could see what was happening on the planet's surface through their sensors. The humans were emerging from underground bunkers that seemed to cover the entire planet. But these weren't soldiers in any sense that understood. They were engineers, farmers, miners, teachers, children, and elderly people. Entire families were participating in the battle. And they were winning. The who had consumed 12 worlds without significant resistance were being systematically destroyed by what appeared to be an entire civilization that had been designed as a single, massive weapon. "Commander," said quietly, "I think we need to revise our understanding of human military capabilities." Could only nod. They were witnessing something that shouldn't be possible. A species that fought not just with soldiers, but with their entire society. A people who had turned the very concept of civilization into an instrument of war. And they were just getting started. The fleet commander was clearly confused, could see the massive bioship in orbit changing its patterns, trying to understand what was happening on the planet below. The aliens had never faced resistance like this before. They were used to fear, panic, and quick surrender. They were not prepared for a trap that used their own biology against them. "Commander," Lieutenant said, "they are sending reinforcements to the surface. Looks like they're getting angry." More bioships descended toward New Meridian. These were larger than the scouts, with thicker armor and more powerful weapons. They began firing organic projectiles at the human positions, trying to destroy the modified mining equipment that was tearing apart their ground forces. That was when saw something that made their blood freeze. The humans weren't taking cover from the orbital bombardment. Instead, they were running toward it. Small groups of humans were deliberately exposing themselves to attract the attention of the bioships. When the ships descended to attack them, the humans would scatter into the artificial canyons they had created. The bioships would follow, trying to corner their prey. Then the humans would detonate massive explosives, bringing down the canyon walls and trapping the alien ships in pits of rubble and twisted metal. "They're using themselves as bait," whispered. "They're sacrificing their own people to lure the enemy into traps." But it was worse than that. Soon realized that the humans weren't just dying to damage the enemy. They were dying to learn from them. Every human who got close to an organism was recording data, studying the alien's biology and behavior. Even when they knew they were about to die, they were gathering intelligence. "Signal from Colonel again," reported. Appeared on the screen, but now she was inside what looked like a captured bioship. Behind her, could see human scientists working on organic samples, dissecting alien creatures while they were still alive. "Observer," said, "we've made an interesting discovery. The nervous system is much simpler than we expected. Our biological warfare specialists think they can create effective countermeasures within the hour." "Biological warfare specialists?" asked. "Colonel, this is a civilian colony. How do you have biological warfare specialists?" Smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Observer, every human settlement has people trained in biological sciences. We call them doctors, veterinarians, and agricultural experts. When you're facing an enemy that uses living weapons, medical knowledge becomes military knowledge." The transmission showed human civilians working alongside the scientists. Farmers were analyzing digestive systems. Doctors were studying alien blood chemistry. Teachers were documenting behavioral patterns while their students took notes. Even children were helping to carry samples and operate recording equipment. "This is insane," whispered. "They've turned their entire population into a research and development program." It got worse. The humans weren't just studying them to defend against them. They were studying them to become them. Within an hour, as Colonel had promised, the humans began deploying biological weapons of their own. But these weren't simple toxins or diseases. They were modified versions of organisms that had been to attack their own kind. watched in horror as human soldiers released captured creatures that had been infected with modified viruses. The viruses didn't kill the aliens. Instead, they changed their behavior, making them attack other instead of humans. The humans had essentially created biological traitors. "How is this possible?" asked. "They've only been fighting for 3 hours. How can they adapt this quickly?" The answer became clear as observed more of the battle. The humans weren't just fighting in the present. They had been preparing for every possible type of enemy for years. Their entire educational system seemed designed to create people who could quickly understand and counter any threat. But the most terrifying part was their willingness to sacrifice. Had seen many species fight bravely, but always with the goal of survival. The humans fought like survival was less important than victory. They would throw themselves at impossible odds, not because they were stupid or desperate, but because they had calculated that their death would create an advantage for other humans. A group of human engineers captured a small bioship by literally jumping on it and tearing it apart with their bare hands. Most of them died in the process, but the ones who survived quickly figured out how to control the ship's biological systems. Within minutes, they were using the captured ship to attack other vessels. "Observer's voice crackled over the radio. She was now speaking from what appeared to be the bridge of a captured warship. "We've taken control of 12 enemy vessels. Our pilots are learning to interface with their biological controls. We should have a functional biofleet of our own within 2 hours. Colonel said, "Your people are dying by the thousands. How can you maintain this level of aggression?" "Because every death teaches us something new," replied. "Every sacrifice makes the next attack more effective. We're not just fighting to survive, observer. We're fighting to make sure they never threaten anyone else again." That was when truly understood what they were witnessing. The humans weren't defending their colony. They were hunting. They had turned New Meridian into a massive trap, not just to save themselves, but to capture and study an enemy that had terrorized the galaxy for decades. They were no longer the hunters. They had become the prey. And the humans were learning everything about them. How they thought, how they fought, how they reproduced, how they died. Every organism on the planet was being dissected, analyzed, and the humans were creating a complete biological profile of their enemy. "Sir," said quietly, "I'm detecting massive energy readings from the command ship. I think they're preparing to retreat." Checked their sensors. The main bioship was indeed powering up its hyperspace engines. The fleet commander had apparently decided that this planet was too dangerous to consume. Better to abandon the operation and find easier prey elsewhere. But the humans weren't going to let them leave. Watched in amazement as captured bioships, now controlled by human pilots, moved to intercept the fleeing vessels. The humans had learned to fly alien ships in a matter of hours and were now using them to prevent their enemies from escaping. "They're not just fighting," said mostly to himself. "They're learning, and they're making sure no one else has to face this threat again." Colonel's voice came over the radio one more time. "Observer, thank you for monitoring our situation. We want you to see what happens next. The galaxy needs to understand what humans are capable of when we have no other choice." The largest bioship, the size of a small moon, began its final descent toward New Meridian. It was clearly the fleet commander's last desperate attempt to destroy the planet before retreating. The ship's weapons could crack continents and boil oceans. Instead of running from this ultimate threat, every human on New Meridian began moving toward it. All 50,000 survivors, from children to grandparents, began singing an old human song about home and family. Then they picked up whatever weapons they could find and started walking toward certain death. And somehow, impossibly, they looked happy. The command ship was a nightmare made real. Had seen it before, but only from recordings of dead worlds. It was easily 20 kilometers long and shaped like some ancient sea monster from the deepest ocean trenches. Its surface writhed with organic weapons that could destroy entire fleets. Energy readings showed power levels that could crack a planet in half. This was the final answer to human resistance. If they couldn't consume New Meridian, they would simply destroy it so completely that nothing would remain. All human forces, this is Colonel, the voice crackled across every communication channel. The enemy command ship is preparing to glass our planet. All defensive positions are compromised. I'm ordering a general evacuation to the deep bunkers. Felt a moment of relief. Finally, the humans were showing some sense. They had fought bravely and learned much about their enemy, but there was no shame in retreating from an impossible battle. Even the most suicidal species had to recognize when they were beaten. But the relief lasted only seconds. Instead of running to the bunkers, every human on the planet's surface began moving in the opposite direction, toward the descending command ship. 50,000 people, many of them wounded, all of them exhausted from hours of battle, started walking directly into the path of a weapon that could vaporize them instantly. "What are they doing?" Lieutenant asked, his voice high with panic. "That ship will kill them all before they get within 10 kilometers of it." Understood, and the realization filled them with a terror deeper than anything they had ever felt. "They're not trying to get close to it, Lieutenant. They're trying to make sure it gets close to them." The humans had been preparing one final trap. All the previous fighting, all the captured bioships, all the biological research, it had all been leading to this moment. They had been learning how to kill something too large and powerful to fight conventionally. As the humans walked toward certain death, they were singing the same song had heard before about home and family and the people they loved, but now could hear what the song really meant. It wasn't a battle hymn or a death march. It was a lullaby, the kind of song parents sing to help their children sleep safely. They were singing about protecting the things they loved. The command ship's weapons began charging. Massive organic cannons emerged from the creature's flesh, each one capable of destroying a city. The air around the ship began to glow with deadly energy. In seconds, everyone on the planet's surface would be dead. That was when the humans sprang their final trap. Every person walking toward the ship was carrying something. Some had backpacks, others had small devices attached to their clothing. A few were pushing carts or driving small vehicles. At first, thought these were weapons or supplies. They were bombs. Every single human was carrying enough explosives to level a building. But not ordinary explosives. During their hours of biological research, the humans had learned how to create weapons specifically designed to kill organisms. These bombs contained modified viruses, biological acids, and organic toxins that would be harmless to most life forms but devastating to the aliens. "Dear gods," whispered, "they've turned themselves into biological weapons." The command ship descended lower, trying to get a better firing angle. Its weapons were almost ready to fire when the first group of humans reached the optimal range for their improvised weapons. They didn't hesitate. Grandparents, parents, teenagers, children, all of them detonated their bombs at the same time. The explosions weren't large enough to damage the massive ship, but they filled the air with clouds of biological agents that couldn't avoid breathing. The command ship shuddered as the biological weapons took effect, but it was still functional, still deadly. Its weapons continued charging. More humans reached detonation range. More bombs exploded. More biological clouds filled the air. The ship's organic hull began to show signs of distress, but it wasn't enough. The vessel was too large, too well protected. That was when realized the true genius of the human plan. The walking bombs weren't trying to destroy the ship all at once. They were trying to weaken it piece by piece, making it vulnerable to the final phase of the attack. The captured bioships that the humans had learned to control were rising from hidden positions all around the planet. But they weren't attacking the command ship from the outside. They were flying directly into its mouth. The command ship, like all of their vessels, was a living creature. It needed to breathe, to feed, to process organic matter. The humans had spent hours learning about its biology, and they had discovered that its intake vents were its greatest weakness. Captured bioships, piloted by humans who knew they would never return, flew directly into the command ship's breathing passages. They carried the largest biological weapons the humans had been able to create. Toxins that would attack the ship's nervous system, viruses that would shut down its organs, acids that would dissolve it from the inside. "They're not just attacking it," said in amazement. "They're poisoning it. They're giving it a disease that will kill it slowly." The command ship tried to purge the foreign objects from its system, but it was too late. The biological agents were already spreading through its massive body. The ship's movements became erratic. Its weapons' fire became sporadic and inaccurate. But the humans weren't finished. As the command ship began its death throes, more humans approached with more bombs, not to attack the ship, but to attack the smaller vessels that were trying to evacuate from it. Escape pods and fighter craft launched from the dying command ship, carrying survivors who hoped to retreat and warn their species about this dangerous new enemy. The humans made sure that none of them escaped. Groups of humans threw themselves at the escape pods, detonating their weapons in clouds of biological death. Others used captured weapons to shoot down fleeing fighters. A few even managed to board enemy vessels and trigger their explosives inside the ships themselves. "They're not just winning," said in a shaking voice. "They're making sure that no survives to warn the others." The command ship crashed into New Meridian's surface with enough force to create new mountain ranges. Its death throes carved valleys and created lakes. The impact could be felt across the entire planet. But somehow, impossibly, humans were still alive down there. Sensors detected thousands of life signs emerging from deep bunkers, from underground tunnels, from hidden shelters that had protected them from the crash. "How many of them are left?" asked. "Check the readings. Approximately 10,000, Commander. They lost 80% of their population." Felt sick. Any sane species would consider this a catastrophic defeat. Losing 80% of your people was the kind of loss that ended civilizations. But when Colonel's face appeared on their screen again, she didn't look defeated. She looked satisfied. "Observer," she said, "the threat to this sector has been eliminated. We've captured extensive biological samples and tactical data. We're prepared to share this information with any species that might face similar threats." Colonel said, "Your losses are catastrophic. How can you call this a victory?" Smiled, and for the first time, it was a genuinely warm expression. "Because our children will grow up in a galaxy where they are extinct. Because no other species will have to face what we face today. Because sometimes, observer, love requires sacrifice." That was when finally understood what they had witnessed. The humans hadn't been fighting for survival. They hadn't been fighting for territory or resources or glory. They had been fighting for love, for the right to protect the things they cared about, for the chance to make sure their children could live in safety. And they had turned that love into the most terrible weapon the galaxy had ever seen. 3 days later, sat in their quarters aboard their observation ship, staring at a blank report screen. Their tentacles trembled as they tried to find words for what they had witnessed. How do you explain to a galaxy of civilized beings that somewhere on the edge of known space, a species had emerged that loved so fiercely they had weaponized their own extinction? The numbers were simple enough. One human colony of 50,000 civilians had faced a swarm of over 3,000 bioships. The humans had lost 40,000 people, but achieved complete victory. Not a single organism had escaped the New Meridian system. The entire enemy fleet had been destroyed or captured. But the numbers didn't tell the real story. They didn't explain why a species would choose to die rather than retreat. They didn't describe the look in Colonel's eyes when she spoke about protecting children who weren't even born yet. They didn't capture the sound of 50,000 people singing lullabies while walking towards certain death. Lieutenant entered the quarters carrying 2 cups of tea. "Commander, the Galactic Council is requesting your preliminary report. They want to know if the human colony survived." "They survived," said quietly, 10,000 of them. "And the extinct, at least in this sector," accepted the tea gratefully. "In your opinion, should we classify humans as a peaceful species or a warrior species?" Thought for a moment. "Based on what we observed, I would say neither, Commander. There's something else entirely." Nodded. That was the problem. Every species in the galaxy fit into known categories. There were warriors like they who fought for conquest. There were defenders like the who fought to protect their territory. There were survivors like the who fought only when cornered. But humans didn't fit any of these patterns. The humans had fought like warriors, but without any desire for conquest. They had defended their territory, but by destroying it completely. They had fought for survival, but by ensuring their own deaths. They were something new in galactic civilization, and wasn't sure the galaxy was ready for them. A soft chime indicated an incoming transmission. Colonel appeared on the screen, but she looked different now. Cleaner, more rested, wearing a civilian outfit instead of battle armor. Behind her could see children playing and adults working to rebuild their shattered colony. "Observer," said, "I wanted to thank you for witnessing our fight. We know it must have seemed brutal to outside observers." "Colonel, I need to ask you something," said. "Why didn't you evacuate? You could have saved all 50,000 people if you had just left the planet." Was quiet for a moment, watching the children play behind her. "Observer, have you ever loved something more than your own life?" That's not how psychology works. We value survival above all else." "Then this might be difficult to understand," said. "We stayed because this isn't how humans prefer to fight. This is how humans fight when we have no choice. When the things we love are threatened, we don't just fight to win. We fight to make sure our enemies never want to threaten anything we love again." "But the cost was acceptable," interrupted. "Every person who died chose to die. We spent weeks discussing this plan, voting on it, preparing for it. Everyone understood that most of us wouldn't survive. But we also understood that if we ran, they would just follow us. They would find our other colonies, our friends, our families. We had the chance to end that threat permanently, and we took it. And if another threat appears," smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression, "then we'll handle it the same way. Humans are very good at learning from our enemies, observer, very good at adapting, and very good at making sure that threats to our loved ones don't get second chances." The transmission ended, but continued staring at the screen for several minutes. Finally, they began typing their report to the Galactic Council. Subject: Incident at New Meridian Colony Formal Military Assessment. Summary: Human colonial forces successfully defended against incursion with complete enemy casualty rate and 0 escapees. Human casualties were significant but within acceptable parameters according to human strategic doctrine. Paused, deleted that last sentence, and tried again. Human casualties were significant, but appeared to be part of deliberate tactical planning rather than military failure. That wasn't right either. How do you explain to the galaxy that a species considers 80% casualties to be a successful outcome? After an hour of false starts, wrote a single line. Recommendation: humanity should never be considered prey. They expanded on this thought carefully. Humans are not warriors or soldiers in any sense that galactic civilization understands. They are something far more dangerous. They are a species that has made peace with the idea of dying for something greater than themselves. Any hostile force that threatens human space should be aware that they are not engaging a military. They are engaging a civilization that has culturally evolved to become a weapon that thinks, loves, and chooses its own targets. Furthermore, humans demonstrate unprecedented adaptability in combat situations. They can learn enemy tactics, biology and technology with extraordinary speed. More concerning, they appear willing to sacrifice their entire population to ensure that no threat survives to threaten others. This makes them the most dangerous defensive force in known space, not because of their technology or numbers, but because of their absolute refusal to allow loved ones to remain in danger. Stopped writing and considered deleting the entire report. It sounded like madness, but they had seen it with their own eyes. They added one final paragraph. Personal observation. I have studied warfare across 1,000 worlds, but I never understood terror until I saw how humans fight. Not because they are cruel or violent, but because they fight like gods choosing to become mortal for the chance to protect what they love. The galaxy is not prepared for a species that has learned to make war itself an act of love. Sent the report, and then immediately transmitted a classified addendum to the High Command. Under no circumstances should forces ever be deployed against human space, not because humans are stronger than us, but because they are willing to die for each other in ways that we cannot understand or counter. If a conflict with humanity becomes unavoidable, recommend immediate full surrender and negotiation for terms. Any species that weaponizes love itself is too dangerous to fight. 6 months later, reports began filtering in from across the galaxy. Fleets were avoiding entire sectors of space, apparently terrified of something they had encountered. Pirate raids near human colonies had dropped to zero. Even the aggressive Empire had quietly moved their border patrols away from human space. Word was spreading through the galactic underworld. Humans were not prey. They were predators that looked like prey. And they were the most dangerous thing in the galaxy to threaten. Never visited human space again. But sometimes, late at night, they would remember the sound of 50,000 people singing lullabies while walking toward death. And they would understand, finally, why humans were the only species that had ever made them feel truly afraid. Not afraid of being killed, afraid of being loved by something capable of such terrible sacrifice.